even though Jonathan, we all knew Jonathan was in a losing race. We prayed and we tried for a miracle, but it didn't happen. And there are several people that stood by his side, and one of them is Sheriff Scott Jones, and stood up for Jonathan running and helped him in many ways. And I found that to be so courageous. So we know that there are some issues before us with gun control, and you have questions as to what our sheriff is going to be doing about that. He has chosen our Tea Party group to come and speak to, and for us to spread the word in our community of what he says. And I'm going to tell you, if he says it, you can take it to the bank, because he knows that we will pester him if he doesn't stand by it. So I appreciate him coming here, and I'd like to introduce Sheriff Scott Jones.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here. I love Carmichael. I love all you folks. I know there's some pressing issues that you want to know about. I'll address those first before I lead into the questions that I know are coming. And then I'll certainly leave enough time for questions to kind of see how AB 109 is rolling out, realignment, and things like that. Anyway, I appreciate the kind words, Jonathan, about how you'd stand by me and vouch for me right up until you gave the analogy about the senator who said the same thing about the child rapist. So I'm not quite sure how to take that, but thank you, I think. So it was brought to my attention. I was actually in Washington, D.C. when I got a call from Michelle, and we finally got in contact with one another, and she told me there were some concerns about where I stood with in relation to gun control, about some of the laws that the federal government's trying to promulgate to affect all of the law-abiding gun owners. The concern was that I hadn't drafted my letter to Joe Biden saying, I'm not going to enforce your laws, that I'm going to stand strong, cross my arms at the county line, and not let you come in here. Rest assured, I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. My actions, I've always thought that actions should speak louder than words, and I think most of you know where I stand on that. And just briefly, for those of you that don't, I have opened up CCW permits in this county for the first time in several sheriffs. I came into office with about 300 permits in a county with a population of 1.4 million people, and right now we're up to about 3,000 and counting. I've about put 5 times the amount of staff in our CCW. I'm trying to keep up with demands. We've got so many appointments that we only open them up in 3-month blocks. So some of you may have seen frustration in trying to set an appointment where they're closed because we haven't opened the next block yet. We've done things like opened up a Saturday and ran 104 people through appointments to try and free up appointments to bring people closer to their appointment dates to get their CCW. I was voted the California Rifle and Pistol Association's Peace Officer of the Year for 2012 because of my position and my approach to firearms for lawful firearm ownership for responsible gun owners. Albeit someplace I encourage all of you to go, the Gun Owners of California fundraiser dinner on April 26th up in Rockland. I bought a table, and if you come, I'll certainly share some stories with you there as well. My point in all this is I've made no bones during the campaign or since saying that I am an ardent supporter of the Constitution and especially of the Second Amendment. I know right now today I can buy a weapon on the black market cheaper than I can buy it in a store. So what does that tell you about supply and demand? You don't have to be an economist to know that there is a glut. There is a glut of weapons in the hands of people that don't need to have them. So, am I going to worry about those people? Yes. Now, conversely, am I going to worry about people that have shown a willingness to go through the legal hoops it takes to to carry a weapon, that have shown a willingness to demonstrate a proficiency in the weapon they want to carry, that have gone through the mental and emotional questions that they need to ask themselves before they carry a weapon, in the sense that they may have to use it to defend themselves. Am I really worried about those lawful, responsible gun owners that may choose, not all the time, certainly, but from time to time as their situation or activity might dictate, to be able to carry a weapon responsibly? Am I going to worry about those people, or am I going to worry about these people over here? I'm not worried about those people. I'm not worried. There's not been anyone in the history of Sacramento County been shot by a holder of a concealed weapons permit issued by this office. I'm not worried about these people. Now, will there be at some point? Probably. I hope and pray that it's someone protecting themselves or their family against something that's trying to do them harm. If that's the case, if it has to be. But otherwise, I think there's a remarkable restraint by folks that are showing a lawful willingness to carry a weapon in a concealed manner to go through the law. So that being said, the question remains, why haven't I written this law? Why haven't I written this letter like some of my sheriffs, certainly many of the sheriffs outside of California, but a few of the sheriffs inside California? It's a very simple explanation, and I hope it carries some weight. It can sound like a cop-out, which is why I preface this by discussing my commitment to the Second Amendment in my deeds. I have found that I have a very powerful political voice here locally. I don't know why anyone would want to listen to Scott Jones, but apparently they want to listen to Sheriff Scott Jones. I have an opinion that matters to the people, and I spend a lot of time cultivating relationships under the Capitol Dome. Yes, with both parties. I gotta make good with the regime as well as the conservatives such as myself. But I am part of the discussion in most political things, including gun control. If I were to write a letter to Joe Biden, basically standing at the border, as I said, with my arms crossed, saying, "You ain't coming here," I wouldn't be part of that discussion. I wouldn't have the ability to influence the discussion about gun control from the inside. And that's a discussion that needs to take place. Yeah. But it doesn't need to take place in terms of how do we make more laws to restrict guns from lawful gun owners and responsible gun owners. It has to do, it's a very complex issue. It's about mental health. It's about family structure. It's about a lot of the things that conservative circles talk about. It is going to be an uncomfortable discussion, to be sure. It's going to be a little bit painful. It's going to run the risk of stigmatizing people, yes, even young people. But it is a discussion that has to take place. If I write a letter, at least in my thinking, I won't have a seat at that table. Let me tell you what I have been doing instead of writing a letter. Shortly after this happened, I went back to Washington, D.C. and met with the National Sheriffs and the Major County Sheriffs Association. That group, you may have seen it on the news, formed a contingency that went and talked with the Vice President and several of the members on the Hill. I met with the staffs of Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, Congressman Barra now. I had met previously with Congressman Lungan, a good friend of mine. Congresswoman Matsui. I met with the Vice President's staff. I met with the COPS office and the Department of Justice. I met with all those people and became part of the national discussion. My encouragement is exactly like I'm telling you. We need to have a discussion. You need to know it's not going to be pleasant, it's not going to be comfortable, but it's a discussion that needs to happen. And it's not about gun control. Because you know what? I know two cops in Santa Cruz. The event I just came from is a Crime Victims United banquet honoring the two fallen officers in Santa Cruz. Sergeant Baker, Detective Butler. They were both killed by a Sig Sauer handgun. But you know what? The next day no one was talking about handgun control. So I asked the question, what if they were killed with an assault weapon? And again, what is the definition of assault weapon? It's a legislatively defined thing. But it's so much a part of California's vernacular that we think assault weapon, that's an assault weapon. But no one's talking about handgun control, and those officers are just as dead. And those officers could have just as easily been killed with an AR-15, a Bushmaster, AK-47, any number of assault weapons. And the hue and cry statewide would have been fierce. See, another example why we need assault weapon and gun control. We don't need gun control, we need criminal control. Last year, I'm proud to say, I created an impact division to combat youth and gang violence. Let me go back a little bit. I talked with Congressman Lunger in his office. He talked about terrorism. I talked about local concerns. He talked about the need to fight terrorism, to spend dollars on terrorism as opposed to local law enforcement issues. I said, Congressman, I won't try and change your mind, but I do want you to think about really what terrorizes people. Do you think people are worried about getting blown up at a sidewalk cafe? Or do you think they're worried about getting killed by random violence driving down Howe Avenue and being the victim of a rolling gun battle down the street or down 99? All of these things have happened in the middle of the day in so-called normal, non-gang neighborhoods. So that's where people are terrorized from. So I created an impact division to combat youth and gang violence. We had 13 gang-related homicides in just the unincorporated county in 2011. In 2012, with our impact division, we reached out to, we have the Rancho Cordova Police Department, Citrus Heights, Galt, and Elk Grove Police Departments. We have the CHP and CDCR at the state level. We have Homeland Security, ICE, ATF at the federal level, combined in this effort. In all of those jurisdictions in 2012, again, Rancho, Citrus Heights, Galt, Elk Grove, and the unincorporated area, from just 13 in the unincorporated area, we had 1 in all of those jurisdictions in 2012. I got 367 guns out of the hands of criminals, including 199 long rifles and assault weapons. Those are the people I need to take the guns from.
That's right. That's right. Amen. That's right.
Now, I'm not saying that all those guns would have been used for a homicide, but I can tell you that every gang homicide starts with an illegal gun. So is it a coincidence that we went from 13 in just the county to less than 1 in 4 cities and the county? I don't think so. So I'm working very hard to get illegal guns out of the hands of people that don't need to have them. But rest assured, and make no mistake about it, I will take no effort, none at all, to take the guns out of the hands of the law-abiding, responsible gun owners that show a willingness and a propensity to comply with the law. So I'm very much part of the discussion in that. But I realize that the folks out here in my county don't know that. And that leads, not knowing, leads to concern. I get that. And so I definitely, during that conversation, I said, I want to come and talk to the group. And my charge to you is to spread that word, because I can't get every group, I can't get every community, but I can get you, and you guys have a voice. And I want you to know, and I want you to spread the word that I am trying to be part of that national and local decision, or discussion rather, about gun control. And it has nothing to do with limiting guns and who can own them. It's all about how do we safeguard law-abiding citizens from folks that shouldn't have guns. And you don't need a gun to kill people. Does anyone know what the largest mass killing in a school was accomplished with? Explosives. In 1929. You don't need guns to kill people. Guns are not, you can take every gun off the street, people are still going to kill each other. You need to look at the underlying cause of why people are committing these mass killings. It's so simple to me. I've been a cop all my life. It's so intuitive and simple to everybody that's sitting here listening to me spew on about this stuff. Why isn't it that simple for the politicians? I don't know. But I do have a voice, and I'm working very hard to use that voice, both nationally and locally, to be part of that. But I want all of you to know, without equivocation, where I stand on that issue. And that's not going to change. That's not going to change. So we're up to about 3,000 CCWs, and in fact, the ones I've granted all now are coming back for renewal, so I have to put more staff in there to take care of the applications and the renewals. So we're definitely working on it. I'm also trying to support a statewide standard legislatively that personal safety is an acceptable reason for the issuance of a CCW. Try and take it out of some of the jurisdictions that have shown an unwillingness to issue CCWs. I'm trying to work statewide for that. Anyway, I'm working very hard to preserve Second Amendment rights. I realize that that may not come across because I don't get to do a briefing to the public. But just know that, and I hope you believe it and take me at my word and judge me on my word by the actions that I've shown in support of those words. So, any questions about that issue before we move on? Yes, sir, in the cheap seats. Hey, how are you?
I'm curious about your budget. What's happening?
The budget is, it's not good, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but before we get off topic on the guns, I just want to make sure
I just want to make a comment. I mean, I think it's great that you're back in Washington, D.C. talking to all these, like Pelosi and Feinstein and Biden, but they don't care.
they do not. As a matter of fact, when I got done talking to Feinstein's staff, he said, well, you know, we're looking for support for her assault weapon bill. Is that something you could do? I thought I was on a hidden camera show, and I said, respectfully, I'm not that person. So
They don't even care about the guns. Their issue is control, period. It has nothing to do with the guns.
it is control. You're right about that. But I do believe that the more people like myself that have credibility, that are in the business of law enforcement, not just politicians, although obviously I am one, but I've spent my career in law enforcement, and I know what we see in terms of mental health issues, and I can tell you who doesn't need a gun or who has a likelihood, but we don't want to stigmatize anybody. We certainly don't want to We don't want to violate any HIPAA rules, but don't take away this guy's arsenal, even though he's threatened to shoot up a school several times. Nonetheless, I digress. But the more times they hear that, and that's why I go back. I mean, one of my quotes that I particularly like is a quote that says, "I am only one man, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something." I may be paraphrasing it, but it's a quote by Helen Keller. And that's true, I honestly feel that way, but I'm one of many, right? So the more people like me that can string a couple of sentences together, that can be articulate, that can go back with a voice, that have some influence locally, and I do, I think the more they hear that, the more they'll have to listen. I mean, let's face it, President Obama's been the best gun and ammo salesman we've ever had. And I'm dead serious. I mean, there is a shortage in ammunition in Texas right now. If there's a shortage of ammo in Texas, we're all in trouble. But the guns are doubling in cost, they're flying off the shelves, the ammo's, and that's because people are very, very concerned. They see that. It's easy for Obama to say, well, I encourage Congress to come up with some responsible gun legislation, when he knows full well that's not going to happen. It's easy for him to say that. It's easy for the politicians to say what's politically expedient. But I don't want to make it easy. And there's plenty like me and you and everybody else that are not making it easy. Some sheriffs choose to do that with a letter, to be very open and say, hey, this is my line in the sand, don't cross it. I get that. And that may make perfect sense for whatever their constituency. But I work very, very hard to have a voice and influence. I can go back and get the appointments. I go back and get the appointments I need. I don't see staffers. I see them because they know they have the influence here in Sacramento County. We're a large county. We have a large voice. I mean, let's face it. People ask me all the time, hey, you ever consider running for assembly? And I say, why would I do that? Number one, I mean, I have a larger constituency than any assemblyman, any senator, any U.S. congressman, any city, county supervisor, city councilman. Why would I step down, number one? Number two, why would I bang my head against a wall in a government that I have no control or no influence over? I would never do that. But that just goes to show you, I do have the biggest political voice in Sacramento County, and I'm not afraid to use it, and people know that. It's taken them a couple of years, but they get it.
What's your opinion of the billions of rounds of ammunition that Obama is buying for Homeland?
You know, I've heard that, and I don't know whether to categorize that as conspiracy theorists or, number one, okay, if it's for the military, I'm glad they're getting the practice they need. Okay.
It's the Homeland Security.
But, I've also heard the conspiracy theorists say, well, they're buying up all the ammo, so none's available. None is available for, law-abiding citizens and so forth. I don't know. I mean, a good conspiracy is often better than the truth, certainly more entertaining and better to ponder, but, I mean, I just don't know.
We have a couple congressmen have pointed that letter, that question to Halatana, asking, why did you need to buy that ammunition? So I don't think it's a conspiracy.
Well, they're definitely buying more ammo. What that's for,
1.6.
I don't know. Let's find the commonalities and see if we can, with some degree of accuracy, find causative factors or predictive factors, and then work that way. Let's work from knowledge forward rather than speculation, fear, reaction backwards. So I would never start with the premise that, well, if you have any diagnosed mental illness in the DSM-3 manual, these things, then you shouldn't be able to have the weapon. I would never start that way. I would start from, let's start at the start and have the discussion about how can we get to a point where we might be able to predict what factors might lead to this, and then see if it's reasonable and responsible to take action on those. And we may find that it's very, 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 very narrow area of mental health. It's not just mental illness that we should try and, particular mental illness that we should try and identify to keep the guns out of. It's a discussion about our mental health system. That we don't have a mental health system in California, and largely the country. So it's about treatment. It's about family values, family structure. It's about independence and not dependence on governmental services. It's about all these things. But like I said, it's going to be a painful, but it's going to have to be a brutally honest discussion. That's where we need to go for gun control. That's when they say gun control, that's what I hear. That's where we need to go, and that's what I'm using my voice to do. So it's the same fallacy. I would never identify things and then say, hey, because those things feel good right now. Those things, well, yeah, if someone's schizophrenic, well, clearly they shouldn't have a gun. Well, we don't know that. I mean, maybe someone with schizophrenia has ever committed any act of violence. It sounds good. It's politically expedient. It's a discussion about mental illness, but it misses the mark. You got to start at the start.
If I were to get my concealed carry permit today and then get a new gun, do I have to do the whole?
You don't, but you do have to, the permit, I think you can put up to 3 guns on it, and you can change them out. I think you just notify our office, and then they issue you a new permit with the new gun. But it doesn't trigger a new application.
I don't have to do
I think you still have to show a proficiency with it.
Oh, so you have to go back to the range and show?
Yeah, but you don't have to go through the course again, you don't have to do a reapplication or anything like that. Yeah, I believe that's true.
Thanks.
I believe that's true.
Sheriff Jones, you said that you would not take weapons from law-abiding citizens. That's not your intent. This is a statement and a question, I guess, that I think the concern lately has been all the rhetoric about what laws will pass. And the concern is what will sheriffs or local law enforcement be willing to enforce. When the letters were sent out, I think what the sheriffs were saying is, if you pass these laws, they will not be enforced in our county. So I think my question is this. I really appreciate that you're in the conversation. The concern, I think, in the citizenry is that once politicians get a hold of this momentum, they'll pass laws that make what was yesterday legal, make it tomorrow illegal, and cause hundreds of thousands of people to say, we are not going to abide by that law because it is a violation of the Constitution. So do you see that as a concern? Is that something we should be concerned about? Because that's what I'm perceiving is coming. If these laws pass, then those who are carrying legal weapons today will have them be legal tomorrow. They'll be asked to register their weapons. They'll be asked to register when they buy ammunition. You know all the laws that are coming down the pipe.
Right, and there are a lot of them that are being proposed and talked about and bantered about. Everybody that wants to jump on the bandwagon is proposing some law. Oh, that's already been done. Well, I'm going to do some other law then. So the bottom line is legally speaking, if something is within the province of the Constitution, then local municipalities, cities, government, states, cities, counties, and states have no choice but to enforce federal law. If something is not within the exclusive, like immigration, for example, as has been decided by case law, if something is not within the exclusive province of the Constitution or federal government, then it is not mandatory that local municipalities, states, cities, and counties enforce it. Guns and gun owners' rights and some of the gun laws that they're contemplating is not an area within the exclusive province of the Constitution. Just because they mention guns in the Second Amendment does not make it an all-encompassing province of the federal government or the Constitution. So the latest and greatest legal opinion on the matter is that cities and counties, while they can choose to enforce the federal laws on that, they are not required to. So to answer your question, it will depend on where you live and what the jurisdiction's willingness to enforce those federal laws. I'm sure that some jurisdictions will see it as just another tool to take guns off the street. As you know, many jurisdictions, some sheriffs included, are not gun-friendly. I can tell you in Sacramento County, I can tell you I absolutely would not waste one bit of resources enforcing any federal law that had to do with weapons registration, which had to do with weapons sales, which had to do with taxation, extra taxation on ammunition registration, anything that came down to the federal. I would not spend one iota of effort or concern enforcing any federal law that comes across. So that takes care of 1.4 million. I'll take care of the rest of the state other ways. So, yes, sir.
So there's a lot of ideas for California, and there's a majority, so something might get passed.
Agreed.
In the discussions that you have, what do you think is the most likely law that will end up? Like, what types of stipulations do you think we'll see as average citizens? And how
I don't know. I've given that some thought, and you have to remember that we all kind of, you don't, because you all pay attention, but California kind of takes it for granted because we live here. We aren't really aware that California has the most draconian conservative gun laws in the country, virtually. And so it's hard to imagine even more strict gun control laws. So of the big ones, I don't know. I mean, even the city has ammunition. Sacramento City has an ammunition registration, which the county has no willingness to do, at least at the board level as it sits. So other than what I would see, I think, is the next move at the state level is outlawing the bullet buttons, is making it truly unchangeable where you have a limited amount of capacity in a magazine. So even the bullet buttons now to overcome the extended magazines and the quick changes, I think they'll make it even more difficult to change. So now people just have to kill people with handguns, I guess. I really don't get it. I mean, you never hear people. Yeah, I don't see any huge things. I mean, does anybody see that differently? Does anybody see any big things coming down? I mean, they'll try, but I really don't think there's a political willingness, a political tolerance for anything major. They'll try and piggyback on some of the federal stuff and nickel and dime it away, which is how they get rid of all of our rights, right? They don't do it wholesale. It's like putting a frog in boiling water. You can't put him in boiling water, but if you slowly turn up the heat, you know, that's what's happening here with all of our rights, not just gun rights, but certainly true of gun rights.
Our buddy Harry Reid has just brought up a bill where you won't be able to transfer gun ownership or sell a gun. You can't grandfather one in.
Can't inherit it either.
Yeah. I mean, you know, on a very small scale, law enforcement officers can get assault weapons, right? If they get a letter from their department. There's no legal mechanism for law enforcement officers to keep that gun after they retire. So they've shown a willingness and a proficiency, and with the sanction of the law, they've been allowed to carry this weapon, and now they can't do it. They have to transfer it out of state. They can't pass it on to their kids. They can't be grandfathered in to make it a family possession. Can't do any of that. So I'm trying to change that. I mean, I'm taking a play out of the liberal playbook as, okay, well, if they want to incrementally do it, let's not try and overturn everything. Let's just make incremental progress. Let's make incremental progress. I know, Dickinson is trying to make a bill that the cops can't get off-roster weapons. Now, unfortunately, it was in response to a couple of our officers that got arrested for it. But does everybody understand what an off-roster weapon is? So, California every year publishes a roster of approved handguns. They can sell and you can buy those guns. If Glock, for example, decides that they want to make a pink Glock to appeal to the female shooter, it is not, it's an off-roster gun. It could be the same exact thing except it's pink. It is not on roster. Many manufacturers will not market and sell guns in California because it's too laborious and expensive and time-consuming and involved to try and get a gun on roster in California. Again, we don't have a sense of that because we live here. So there's a lot of new guns that are out there for sale that are not in California. That list of off-roster guns is growing because manufacturers are showing an unwillingness to go through the hoops to get it on roster in California. Because we're just a small island in the gun sales, right? So this list of off-roster guns is growing. So I can't get a pink Glock if I wanted to. I can, as a cop, where my cops got in trouble is they were using it as kind of a business. Oh, you want a chrome nickel-plated Double Eagle or Desert Eagle? Okay. And they take orders, and that's what got them into trouble. But, and there's no law against me selling an off-roster weapon. If I have an off-roster weapon, I can sell it to you. There's no law against that. I just can't do it with that purpose to give it to you, which is, like I said, where those officers, former officers, got in trouble. So they want to put as many guns as possible, or put as few guns as possible on roster. But it's almost like an assault weapon designation. It's arbitrary. The things that are on there, the things that are off roster, you think, oh, they must be dangerous. They must be, you know, high capacity magazine. No, it could be a pink Glock.
A light rail or something.
What's that?
With a light rail on it.
Yes, exactly right. Any modification, it's not on roster. So it's an off-roster gun. So, yes, sir.
We talk about guns getting into the wrong hands, but if we believe what I've been hearing on the news or seeing, we're turning felons loose in droves to go back on the streets. We know they can get guns. What's the solution to that?
It's a difficult problem. Number one is guns are a huge part of our society. Always have been since the very days of the founding of our country. a lot of people have guns, and a lot of guns get stolen. I mean, there's burglaries and thefts, and a lot of them are stolen. They are. I mean, what's the solution for that? Get rid of people's guns so they don't get stolen? Well, that'd be one solution. But I believe that because people have a lot of guns, they're going to be a prime target. But there are a lot of guns on the black market, a lot. And there are unscrupulous gun dealers, and there's secondary arms sellers, and people can go buy weapons out of state. I mean, it's not just stuff being stolen. You
How
know,
about keeping these guys locked up?
well, there's that. Are you? Wait a minute. No. Everybody has an opportunity to be rehabilitated. So, I got a call from Mayor Johnson. I forget where I was. He called me and said, "Hey, how do you feel if we want to do a gun buyback?" I said, "I don't care if you want to do a gun buyback. What do I care?" He says, "Well, I thought you'd be against it." Why? Because you love, guns and gun guy. And I said, "Well, if someone wants to give up their gun, I'd rather them give it up, to the police department than a burglar. I mean, if someone doesn't truly, grandparent or something, they have guns somebody died and they just have guns, there ought to be a safe way for people to surrender those guns if they don't want to sell them. I mean, I'm all for that. Why wouldn't I be?
Right.
Sell them if you want to sell them to somebody who wants to buy them. But, if they want to surrender them, he's very surprised about that. But yeah, I'm all for getting the guns out of the hands of the bad people. Because odds are, if someone doesn't want guns, they're not going to use them, they're not going to take care of them, they're not going to store them safely, there's a good chance they might get stolen and end up, involved in a crime. I don't want that either. So, yes.
I wanted to follow up on that gentleman's question over
I have a
there.
nice picture of you and I, by the way.
Should I post it on Facebook?
I'll send it to you.
I want to follow up on his question about what if the federal government were to pass highly onerous gun restrictions. What about the state legislature? Because as a arm of the state, are you not required to enforce state law?
I am.
So, for example, if one of those bills that's going through the legislature right now, I think the Bonto bill dealing with magazine capacity, says, no more magazines that are capable of taking more than 10 rounds are allowed to be in the hands of private citizens anymore, and we're now declaring no grandfathering, and you're automatically a criminal if you own one of those. How would you feel about enforcing something like that?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that my efforts would be prospective. In other words, I still wouldn't spend any effort going out and doing, gun checkpoints, like DUI checkpoints. But obviously, if something came to my attention, I mean, I don't get to choose which laws I enforce, so I would have to enforce that law. I would spend no effort in going prospectively and saying, pouring through old reports and seeing who had 10, 11 Brown magazines, and because it was no grandfather and going back, I wouldn't do any. I wouldn't even if I didn't care about guns, just because I don't have the staff to do it. I'm worried about preventing new victims, and that's a growing concern with the way the society we find ourselves in. But a little bit different than federal laws that I really wouldn't have a choice. So it's all the more reason I need to be diligent.
Unconstitutional, I know.
So.
I called the sheriff's department tomorrow and said, I had all my guns in my car, they were all stolen. How much effort would you take to prove that I was lying?
You are on video.
Don't answer.
Well, Mr. Steinberg, I wouldn't advise that. Okay, have we beaten that dead horse enough? No, not quite yet? Still kicking?
Back to the CCWs just for a second. It'd be interesting to hear at the saturation point in a county like ours, what percentage of the population would choose to have a permit?
Well, I didn't make my decision in a vacuum, although I had strongly held beliefs. I did a little bit of research, because I mean, I have a responsibility to everybody, not just to further my own personal beliefs, but also I'm charged with, I mean, it's a pretty heavy burden to provide safety for an entire county. Generally speaking, in shall issue jurisdictions, studies show that from between 2 and 4% of the people really care about getting a CCW. It tells me a couple of things. Number one is that more people care about the right than actually care about obtaining a CCW, which makes sense. The other thing it shows is that crime always goes down. always, in all those jurisdictions, when they transition to a shall issue jurisdiction, crime always goes down. Because I theorize a couple of reasons. Number one is the bad guys don't know it's only 2 to 4%, number one. But number two, perhaps more importantly, they don't know which 2 to 4%. If you remember, maybe a decade ago, maybe a little longer now, in Florida, when criminals were targeting people driving rental cars, and it was a big deal. The enterprise had to take the stickers off the back and everything else. That's because Florida went to a shall issue jurisdiction. They didn't know who had them in Florida, but they were reasonably assured that tourists didn't have them, and so they became easy pickings. The same would happen here if we became a shall issue jurisdiction. But I'm hopeful that if we come up with a state standard of personal safety, we take the political pressure off the folks that don't want to do it. Oh, well, it's the law now, so who cares? My guess is, well, I don't know if that's true or not, but of the people that have very firmly held, strongly held beliefs that there shouldn't be CCWs and all that, I think those are probably few and far between. I think most people come up with their political position on the issue for political expediency. This is still a liberal county. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that I've not been challenged in any meaningful way, and I mean that by the media or anything else. My sense is they're waiting for some spectacular failure, and then they will come out with both barrels blazing. That's a bad analogy. But unless and until that happens, and I'm confident that it will not happen, they've given me a pass on it, which is a little strange. But like I said, I think more people care about the right than actually care about carrying a concealed weapon. And of those people that carry a concealed weapon, it's been my experience that have a CCW, rarely carry a weapon. Rarely. I mean, I tell this story as, look, I'm able to carry a weapon anywhere in the state 24 hours a day. Do I always carry a weapon? No. Am I carrying a weapon now? No. I feel pretty safe here. I suspect that several of you are. That's okay. But, depending on what I'm doing, depending if my family's with me, depending on where I'm going, I may choose to carry a weapon. Why shouldn't everybody have that choice? It's not that they're going to carry a weapon all the time. But you should be able to make the decision of how best to protect your family for yourself. I should make that for you. And so that's just the way I feel about it. All right, enough about that. I want to go to the budget before I forget. Budget's going to be challenging. Everybody's heard the economy's getting better, it's ticking upward, our sales tax revenue. Well, it really is, you know, incrementally. In the Sacramento County, our sales tax revenue, our property tax revenue is going up. About $2 million for each of those at the county level. That's good, except our costs are far outpacing that. Right now, in addition to the ongoing issues we have, our cost increases this year are about $12 million for our employee unions. About $12 million increase. And remember the largest Cops Grant Award in the country we got, the Sheriff McGinnis actually got in 2010, 50 officers. Really helped us get over that slump that we had from the layoffs in 2009. Well, guess what? This is year 4, and it's time for us to start paying for them. That's about $7 to $8 million. So our cost just for those two things, plus our retirement costs are going up a little bit, but is about $20 million. So even if we get each of those $2 million blocks, we're still a long way away. So do I think there's going to be layoffs? No. Do I think there's going to be any significant reduction in services? I certainly hope not. Not on my watch. But it will require some, we're taking measures now. If you recall, the last budget we went in, we were $19 million short. We were that far apart from being able to resolve. I scrubbed our budget, went back, and we had a lot of blood, sweat, tears, fights, and crying. And I went to the board and said, I didn't cry for the $19 million, which has traditionally been the case. I said, look, we think we can absorb, we can internally regulate $8.3 million. What we cannot come up with, what we can't bridge is $10.7 million. That's what I'm asking for. To their credit, and because we built up credibility by this process the previous year, we got $10.7 million. So we not only made up our $8.3 million throughout the year, but we were going to come in $1 million or $2 under budget for the first time ever. However, 6.7 of that $10.7 million they promised us, they told us just a week or two ago that we're not getting. So now we're going from, we're all high-fiving each other coming in a couple of million under budget, which is really $10 million making up. Now we're $3 or $4 or $5 million over budget. So we're doing what we can to be good stewards of not only the county government, but the taxpayer dollars. We're trying to hold some vacancies to the extent it doesn't affect public safety and hold some promotions and things to try and get us closer to the end of the year. But it will be a challenge. At the end of the day, we make it. We don't have any layoffs. But it is definitely going to be a challenge. And if we do have to make cuts in services, you know, we've made up for it. We're nowhere near where we were in 2008 in terms of numbers. But our efficiency, our crime stats, and the way we do business is so different and so much more efficient that we look and are much better at what we do. So, you know, hopefully I'll be able to continue those internal efficiencies. But that's kind of the bottom line of the budget. Wasn't that the question you asked? You got a follow-up question? All right. Sorry, it's getting late. Go ahead.
The staff at the Sacramento airport?
Yes.
100% funded by the federal government?
My staff?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's a contract. We have several significant contracts. Most people think of the Sheriff's Department as a county entity, but in reality, over half of our department is county-wide in scope, including the city. So the airport, the courthouses, the jails, I mean, everybody, no matter what agency, books in our jail, the dam police, I like to call them, the Folsom Dam Security Detail, I like to call them the dam police, for obvious reasons. So we have a lot of contracts that Rancho Cordova is a contract city for us to provide law enforcement. So yeah, they're fully paid for. And I told them out there I don't want to see any of my guys on a Segway, on those little chariot things that they drive around. So if you ever see somebody out there, it's going to be one of the security guys, not my guys. No, sir.
Just a statement to encourage you. You're wondering why you're not getting flack. I know, I'm pretty sure that even liberals, they want a man like you holding the fort for security. And you're doing a great job.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think you can, I want to encourage you to continue to be bold and stand your ground.
Yes.
And I think all of Sacramento County feels good knowing that you're leading law enforcement for the county Sheriff's Department. And I would say that it is to your advantage, and you should remind them of that. You know, we're keeping vigilance for all of you to play your liberal games. And, you know,
That's true of realignment, for sure.
Absolutely. Don't mess with security. And I was going to ask segue to realignment. You said you'd mentioned something about that. I know it's a serious problem for you.
It is.
It's running under the radar, but I know you have a concern. California-wide, there's a concern in law enforcement, if you wanted to address that.
So just going back in history a little bit, as realignment developed, progressed, and really I'll say as the court deadline loomed closer, because that really is what drove realignment. It was the court deadline. It really had nothing to do with the local municipality's ability to render rehabilitative services as they sold it. I became more and more concerned that many big questions were not being answered, that it was going to be underfunded, and that, importantly, crime was going to go up and victims were going to increase. And so I spoke to my fellow sheriffs, gave really one of the best speeches I think I've ever given in a group of folks. I mean, hey, here's an idea: build more prisons.
Or use the empty ones.
Yeah, I have a question, Scott. I just want to throw it out there. What about enforcing the death penalty? That gets rid of criminals too.
It does, one at a time. You know, the death penalty thing, that was a huge battle. I was involved in that committee to the No on 34, I guess it was, committee. And it was an education piece because they said each one costs $100 million or whatever it was. But you know how they figured that, you know how they calculated that number? They took everybody on death row from the time it got reinstated back, whatever year that was, the cost of all of those inmates to today, and divided that number by the number of executions we've had, whatever it's been, 7, 8, 12, whatever it is. And that's how they got that. So by that logic, everybody else should be able to be killed for free. Right? Because we've already paid for them. But that's how they, I mean, there was so much disingenuousness in that entire Yes on 34 campaign. I'm sorry to see that the 36, the 3 strikes thing got repealed. Almost 3,000 inmates now are eligible for rehearing it and will be released. What was their recidivism rate while they were in prison for 25 years? 0. What is it when 3,000 of them get out? Well, that's 2,100 new victims. At least 2,100 new victims. So and I would argue that these people that have shown a willingness to engage in crime as a vocation, like these 3 strikers, their recidivism rate is going to be much higher.
What do you think the driver is to have those kind of results for those kind of initiatives?
Well, the death penalty is, you've got politics at work again. You have got other states that From the time, I wish I could remember which state, from the time one particular state approved a one-drug cocktail for the death penalty, I guess it's not a cocktail if it's only one ingredient, and their first execution was a week. We could do that here, but yet the governor's office is needlessly appealing and fighting, disingenuously I think, fighting to this three-drug cocktail illegal Eighth Amendment claim when they don't need to do it. They don't need to fight that. They could simply go to a one-drug cocktail that's already passed constitutional muster and use that. That would be one thing. Of course, you know, then the appeals and everything else that has to go, it's expensive. Another thing they said was, well, it's expensive to have someone on. It's much more cheap, more cost-effective to have someone in general population. What they fail to see is people on death row, their crime wouldn't allow them to be in general population. They'd be administrative segregation, which is the most expensive kind of incarceration, more expensive than death penalty, than death row. So there's a number of things that they can do. Politically speaking, it's never going to happen under this administration. It's just never going to happen. They will use overt and covert methods to make sure that the death penalty doesn't get reformed in the way they want it to be. Our only hope is, frankly, either public outcry, and I often wonder how bad things have to get before people revolt. Change happens one of two ways, right? Evolution or revolution. And so, as you all know, people are tired of evolution. So at what point do they go to revolutionary type change? For me, I'm already past it. But apparently I've got less of a tolerance than most people in California. So it's either going to happen with the public outcry or a different administration. Which one's more likely? I can't say. I can't say. So.
But we already had the initiative issue, and that's supposed to be the people's voice. That's the people's being able.
Well, the people voted that they wanted the death penalty, right? But it's really said nothing to reform. What it did do is put the debate and the discussion on a statewide scale, and that's good. But the opponents of Prop 34 were very good at telling a story about things that could be done. You know, I'd like to see them still doing that. Anne Marie Schubert locally is in the DA's office and a DA candidate behind Jen Scully. She was the lead on that committee, did a very good job. She had a great story to tell. She was very passionate about it. I'd like to see that passion and the discussion continue, because now that, you know, we're guilty of it too. We're breathing a sigh of relief. Oh, that was a close one. Yet nothing's changing, and you know, they'll be able to sneak back and use some of those arguments again.
Well,
it'll be on the ballot again.
How's Prop 35 influenced your people?
What's
I know, because Prop 35 was the human trafficking, and there was supposed to be money allocated towards dealing with human trafficking.
Oh yeah, no money. There's no money. There's never any money. It increased the sentences for certain types of trafficking. I will tell you this, trafficking is something that I'm becoming increasingly concerned about. I'll be a little bit cautious when you hear things that Sacramento is the second worst in the country for human trafficking. You hear all these stats about Sacramento County being so terrible for human trafficking. I can be a little cautious about listening to that. I'll tell you why. We have much greater enforcement and awareness of trafficking in Sacramento than most of the rest of the country. So therefore, we have more investigations, we generate more stats, we have a greater awareness and acknowledgement that it exists, and therefore, we create more stats. I mean, if I didn't make any arrests in my agency, our crime rate would fall through this floor, right? Because there'd be no arrest. A little bit true of the opposite. The inverse is also true of human trafficking. Because we have greater enforcement, because we have task force for human trafficking that we're involved in, because we do a lot of good work, it generates a lot of buzz and stats about Sacramento County. That being said, we are on a literal crossroads of sorts, 80, two coast-to-coast highways, 80 to the east and west, 5 to the north and south. So we are that crossroad is attractive for human trafficking. It's an emerging issue. I liken it to domestic violence of 20 years ago. Kind of knew there was an issue. We weren't really that hot on really enforcing, we as a community, not the sheriff's department. You know, it's more or less, you know, it should stay in the home. It's difficult to prosecute. You had to have the victim willing to prosecute. No one ever did. There had to be some law changes. One of the changes was you prosecute despite the victim's willingness to prosecute. There had to be some legislative changes. That's where we are with human trafficking. There needs to be greater tools. It's not just bigger sentences. It's funding. It's best practices. It's looking at what other states are doing. It's something as simple as making a law that every massage parlor has to have a sign written in several languages that, with a hotline, if you think you are the victim of human, or if you know of any instance of human trafficking, call this number. Simple, cheap, it's worked dramatically in other states. So there's that sort of emergence of awareness going on right now, kind of like domestic violence 20 and 25 years ago. I think you'll see much more movement on human trafficking, both in the funding, both in the state and national discussion over the next 5 or 10 years. I've already met with a bunch of community-based and non-governmental organizations about human trafficking, about how we can partner with my limited resources and their expertise. I've met as recently as 2 weeks ago. So that's something we're going to be more concerned with. All right.
Last question real quickly. How can we help you? Obviously, you're our guy and you've done a great job, and I know you got an election coming up. What can we do to help you?
Well, if you have any money, give it to Jonathan. Because what I found out, it's a lot easier for me to raise money this time around. No, actually, I appreciate the support I get from this group and Carmichael in general. I mean, I love Carmichael. All 4 of my kids were born here. It's where my campaign office was. And I love sharing conservative values with like-minded people. I don't always get the privilege to talk in front of like-minded people, so I have to be a little bit more tempered in how I express some of my views. I think just spreading the good word. I mean, just the nice things that were said about me in the introductions, I very much appreciate, and to the extent that you can convey that message, not just for me necessarily, but for my department. The more people I realize that a part of my job is to make people love me, and then that love transfers to the sheriff's department. And it really makes it easier for my men and women that are out there really doing the lion's share of the heavy lifting. It makes it easier for them to do their job. So to the extent you can support me and support them, that's all I can ask. So anyway, thank you very much.